And we're live, back
We're
with
live.
a special guest, an individual that is going to be one of the guests that I have on this show all the time as a recurring guest as we're growing and going through our journeys in business and in life and, wanting to share the wisdom. Mo is somebody that I always want to have on to, share his thoughts, his perspectives, and his advice on all things business, all things performance, entrepreneurship, all things life in general. So, Mo, thanks again for being here. Looking forward to it.
Of course, man. Excited to always talk with you. Excited to run this podcast. I mean, we've been talking for like an hour and 15 minutes before this. I feel like we should have just recorded everything from the
We
beginning.
probably should have, to be honest. Sometimes those conversations are a lot more interesting and a lot more fun because they're so candid. We talked
Right.
about a lot of things that I know for a fact we won't talk about on air. And
Right.
the reality is, if it's me and you as the listeners, as the audience, we want to hear the real conversations, right? We want to hear
Right.
the real opinions of the hosts, right? So realistically, I think at some point, sooner or later, we'll record those real and raw conversations. But at this stage, I think, we just want to keep it more professional and to the point.
Fair. That makes sense.
It was definitely interesting. We definitely had a lot of good talks. And we talked all things from life to business to geopolitical issues to what's happening in the world. And, finally, we decided to press record and get this officially rolling. But let's start here. I want to take this conversation really general and just cover a lot of different areas that I think would be interesting to entrepreneurs, business owners, the majority of our audience who are watching this, and just to help people out, especially with where we are in the world today, with where we are in the year, and looking ahead into the new year. So I want to ask you just right off the bat, how do you look at end of year? How do you look at going into new year? How do you process this transitionary period where we're almost taking a step back to slow down and celebrate Christmas and holidays, and everybody's already talking with that language, but at the same time, realistically speaking, this is when we need to be laying the foundation and the groundwork to go into 2024 with full speed and full momentum. How do you juggle that?
I don't know. I guess for me, it's a little bit different because I feel like in the corporate world, people tend to slow down a lot. And like, they're like, oh, well, it's Q4 and we got to hit our quotas in 15 days. And, so we can take some time off for Christmas and stuff. To me, Christmas just has never been like a massive thing. Holidays have never been. Holidays in general, any kind of holiday, has just not been like this huge take a break moment for me. I just view it as any other day. Same thing even for my birthday. Like, sure, I'll take, a day off and do something, but it's not huge for me. I see every quarter the exact same. And for me, it's like, well, it could be quarter one or quarter four. It's the same thing to me. You go hard in every single quarter. And I do believe if anything, towards the end of a year, it's even more important to go hard because it's setting you up immediately for Q1. If you don't go hard in Q4, then you're going to go into Q1 with less momentum. You're going to go into Q1 a little bit lazy, tired, chillaxed, just taking some time off. And then now it takes an entire Q1 before you get to Q2 to actually be ramped up. So I like to do the ramping up towards the end. Also, I mean, it's starting to get, become wintertime. For me, I find wintertime is like the greatest time to sit down and bunker down and like do the work because there's not much to do. So yeah, for me, it's not something that's on my mind at all in general. Like, it's just like, oh, another quarter. Who cares? I don't even number it. It's just like, let's go towards the goal. This is the end goal. Doesn't matter what quarter we're in. Let's keep pushing.
Yeah, and that's the ideal way to look at it, right? I mean, in an ideal world, you want to wake up every single day, regardless of what day of the week, what month, what type of holiday, what brand we've labeled it. It's another 24 hours to wake up, to be disciplined, to have a structure to your day, and to move forward towards your goals, whatever those goals may be. In this case, it's business goals we're talking about here. But if those goals are personal goals, if they're athletic goals, health goals, relationship goals, whatever they may be, ideally speaking, you wake up every day and you move closer to those goals. So I'm definitely with you. I think the same way as well. I feel, sometimes, as much as we may not like to admit it, we still do get influenced by the seasons that we're in, by everybody else around us, friends, family, employees, wanting to take a step back, wanting to celebrate holidays, New Year, whatever else it may be, getting invited to events and parties and gatherings left and right. As much as you can say no and turn those things down and prioritize your time, it's still more difficult than, the regular times where everybody's focused on business. And I agree with you that for most people, it takes till at least halfway through January to get back to a routine and get back on track. And those New Year resolutions, New Year, new me, usually goes away by mid-February as well.
Yeah.
So it's almost like from mid-December to mid-February is a waste of time for most people. And it's pretty unfortunate when you think about it that way. It's fortunate for people like you and me who are going to capitalize on that time and build and continue our momentum. But I feel for most people, it really becomes a wasted time, a wasted couple of months. And yeah, I think there can really be a lot more use in that time. How do you go about goal setting? How do you go about starting the new year? Have you done anything already? Have you thought about 2024 already, or are you leaving that for January?
It's weird when January hits around, or before January hits. I like to do my business goal setting, and I think you do the same thing with your birthday, right? For birthday, I do my personal goal setting. So even though it's like a month and something apart, I still like to separate the two, because with business, sure, you follow the year, right? Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. Most businesses do that. And so that's why I like to do it in January for business specifically. And then when February rolls around, I do my personal, because I follow my own calendar for my personal stuff. Every year is my year. But yeah, I mean, I haven't put too much thought into my goals right now. I think what's more important than goals, and I would love to hear your perspective on this, but I think what's more important as I go through December, because now I'm starting to build up a lot of momentum, especially with my lead gen and sales, is seeing some form of result or momentum is more important than the actual goals themselves. Because you can set goals, but the problem with just setting goals is, like, if you don't have a vehicle to take you there, you're going to get discouraged. But you could have a vehicle with no goals, but if it's bringing results, you feel good and you want to keep building off of those results. So I'm starting to notice, like, for me, setting goals is not as important as making sure that whatever I'm doing actually works to bring the end result, which to me at this point in business is, how do I get more sales? How do I make more money? Like, that's the most important thing. I'm reading this book right now, recommended to me by one of my friends, called Ready, Fire, Aim.
Yeah, I've read that actually. It's a great book.
Incredible book, man. And I'm probably only going to read the first quarter of it, because the way the book is split up is 0 to 1 million, 1 million to 10 million, 10 million to, what is it, 100 million, and 100 million plus. So I want to be able to hit, a mil in 1 year. So I'm going to read the first quarter of this book. And it talks about one thing. It says the most important thing is sales. How do you increase sales? How do you get behind the phone? How do you convince people to buy your product? That's it. So for me, more important than just setting goals right now is, like, how do I make sure that what I'm doing is working towards this one goal, which is sales and business. That is single-handedly the most important thing. And I can sit there all day and write down all my goals and write down the plans, and that's important. But even when I was talking to one of our mutual friends, he was like, just test things really, really quickly, and don't box yourself into one thing, because what happens is you try that one thing over and over again because you're stubborn, when in reality it's not bringing results. He does tests in 1 month frames. I'm running this test for 1 month. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, we move on to the next test. And we keep doing that until we find a test that we can actually double down on. And then once we find that, we just keep doubling down. So for me, that's what's more important, is just like sales right now. I don't really care about like setting a crazy plan. It's like the only thing that I care about right now is how do I build off the momentum of sales and keep just building on that.
It's interesting you said that, and you posed the question to me because I think it was yesterday, maybe a couple of days ago, I was actually thinking about the saying of, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to work with a lot of guys that were, high performers, very driven guys, and they had very specific and, to be completely frank, rigid ideologies around sales, around business. And they used to say, it is all about the destination. Whoever says it's about the journey is a loser because, they're not getting the results. They're not, actually achieving the destination. It's all about the destination. It's all about the money and the goals and the end result. The journey is completely irrelevant because, you don't want to be on the journey. You want to get to the end result. And I used to subscribe to that mindset as well. I used to, be a cheerleader for that mindset. I used to say the same things all the time, regurgitate the same things all the time because I was just young and naive and inexperienced, right? And as I got more and more experience and as I went through my stages in my sales career across 7 different industries and my business career as an entrepreneur, actually trying to figure things out on my own and get into business for myself, completely different chapter, right? As you know, I started to completely change my perspective on goal setting and goals in general. First of all, on that saying, I've come to the conclusion, at least at this stage in my life, that it's almost all about the journey and the process, because that's where all the growth is. That's where all of the adaptation is. That's where all of the memories are. That's where all the experiences are. Charlie Munger has a beautiful quote where he says, enjoy the process along with the proceeds, because the process is where you live. And that's the reality of it, right? You can be Charlie Munger worth billions of dollars, but the proceeds, at the end of the day, you're not going to take it with you. All the Egyptian pharaohs back in the day who used to bury themselves in giant tombs with gold and everything else thought they're taking it with them to the afterlife, right? And as far as we know right now, that's not the case. Right. And, if we know that you can't take it with you, it's not about the proceeds. It's about the process. The process is where you live. The process is that dash between born this year and died this year. The dash in the middle is the process. That's your entire life. That's all your memories, experiences, relationships, all the things that really matter. So for me personally, I've really changed my perspective on all of this and on goal setting in general. And I really do think it is all about the journey or the process. Journey might not be the right word for it, but the process is the right word for it. You're growing, you're adapting. My first mentor used to say, set goals not for the goal itself, because that's irrelevant. Set goals for who you have to become to achieve the goal. So it's not about what you're getting at all. He used to say this back in the day. I should have known this earlier, right? Listening to his advice. But he used to say, it's not about what you're getting. It's about who you're becoming. So if the becoming is the important factor, it's all in the process, right? It's all in the process of who you're becoming. So I used to write down goals, for the next 3, 5, 10, 20 years. I used to write down these huge goals and also just goals that were really materially focused, right? And they weren't really my goals. They were what I thought success was, what I thought I would want. But the older I'm getting, the more I realize I have no interest in any type of material possessions. I really don't. I'm not impressed by nice cars or flashy things or jewelry or whatever else, people like, designer clothing and whatever else. I had a phase where I bought all of that and I went through that and I realized I'm not materialistic at all. What I really love and what I value more than anything is experiences. Yep. It's freedom of choice, autonomy to live a life that I want to live exactly how I want to live it with who I want to live it. Right? All of the money I've spent traveling to Europe, traveling to Africa, traveling to all these countries, I've never regretted that. That experience, the freedom, the autonomy, that's been beautiful, right? The perspective shift, that's been worth every penny and more. So for me, I've realized that's what I really value. So I want to set up a lifestyle where there is complete financial and time freedom, and then you can really create from a place of real creativity, not from a place of fear or doubt or trying to make money, but create from a place of, genuinely trying to bring value to the world, genuinely trying to tap into your own potential and see what you could, live up to. And it's been really interesting. And I'm recently re-looking at all of that. So just like you said, to kind of cut this short and turn it back over to you, I'm not really setting goals like I used to at all. I'm not writing down very specific or precise goals. I'm more focused on who I'm becoming. The way I do that practically is I'm focused on discipline. I'm focused on routines. I'm focused on what aspects of my character I really want to double down on, what skills I really want to build. And there's no finite number or time limit on it, right? Even the goal of like 7 figures or 8 figures or whatever else, it's just irrelevant because it all depends on who I'm becoming in that process and what I really want. And I don't know, in 12 months or in 36 months, what I'm going to be thinking.
Right.
It could completely change, right? What I was thinking 3 years ago is completely different than what I'm thinking today. I could have never predicted what I'm thinking today 3 years ago. So who am I to say I'm going to be able to predict what I would want 3 years from now, right? And I think when you're focused on yourself and the process and the discipline and day to day so strongly that you grow so much every week, let alone every month, let alone every year, you won't even recognize yourself.
Right.
So you're setting yourself up for a lot more, um, just higher levels of achievement. So that's my
Yeah, I
take on it
agree.
right now, at least.
Yeah, I totally agree because you are a different person. That's why I also don't like to set long-term goals because you're setting it, you're setting those goals from the person you are right now instead of the person you're going to be, which is completely, your goals are going to be different 10 years from now. I do still like to sit down and look at numbers like within my business, like what's working right now and how do we improve the numbers? You know, Q1, what's the number goal and what's the plan behind it? Q2, what's the number goal and what's the plan behind it? And not necessarily revenue, but like, you know, the more technical aspects of things of like, how do we get a higher reply rate? How do we get more opportunities and calls booked in? How do we convert those calls at a higher level? Like that stuff is important because that's how you essentially grow a business. But like, I don't sit there and go, I want to make $20 million because I want to have a Lamborghini. And it's like, that shit just doesn't matter to me. Because, and I'm not religious. I want to put this out here. I'm not religious, but I love this quote, which is, they planned, but Allah plans, and Allah is the best of all planners. And I freaking love that. Like, at the end of the day, like, you are not in control of what the universe has in plan for you. Like, I've come time and time again. I didn't used to believe this woo-woo stuff, but as life goes on, I've come time and time again where like everything that I planned most of the time did not go my way, and it went a completely different way, and it actually went in a way that was in my favor that I didn't expect. Even if in the moment it didn't seem like it. Everything is just like, I look back and I'm like, everything was just meticulously planned by something greater that I just didn't know. Maybe this is my way of justifying everything that has happened up until this point. But even if it is a justification, I think that mindset is really good because then you're not boxed in and you kind of, you do have a plan for how things are going to go in the short term, but you also allow the greater good, the greater universe or whatever to take you where it needs to take you. And I truly, truly believe in that now. It's a completely different outlook on life because again, I look at all the things that happen. I'm like, that was bad, that was bad, that was bad in those moments. But now when I look back at it, I'm like, it was exactly what I needed. Exactly what I needed. I wouldn't have changed it for anything else. And so, you know, you can plan all you want, but you know, God is the best of all planners. And there's a bigger plan for you. There's something bigger for you.
It's always interesting to look at this philosophy and look at the positive side of it. I mean, you could argue, one would argue that, practically speaking, you're just in hindsight looking back at things and choosing to be optimistic. You're looking at the glass half full.
Right.
This happened for my best interest. This is how it worked out for me. And you're connecting dots. And, we are pattern seeking mammals, as they say. And, we can connect dots and we can look at the positive side of things if you're more positive oriented like we both are, and look at things like, there was a bigger plan for me. That's what a very pragmatic thinker would say, right?
Right.
Or an atheist or some other person. But yeah, from the religious point of view, they would say there's a greater plan, there's a bigger plan. God or the universe or the world has a plan for me already. It's predestined already. It's an interesting concept, interesting idea. This whole philosophy of destiny versus free will and whatnot is really interesting in general. But like you said, I think at the end of the day, what matters is what that does for you, what that mentality does for you, and that mentality definitely takes the pressure off of you and allows you to really look at everything from a positive point of view and continue to grow, continue your developmental journey. So it's definitely interesting in that way for sure. Now, in terms of business goals, I agree with you. I think you need to have some numbers. Everything I said before wasn't to say that as a business owner, you don't need to have targets and goals and revenue metrics and everything else. You definitely do. But I think you nailed it when you said looking at the more technical numbers and measuring the improvement, measuring the progress and the growth. I think that's really where it is, right? If you're just looking at your business right now as a beginner business owner or a solopreneur, young entrepreneur, whatever it may be, if you're looking at your business and your goals and you're thinking, I want to go from 0 to 1 million, and that's my numbered target or goal. That's not going to do much for you, right? There's a
Right.
lot more that goes into that, in that gap, that needs to be in place for you to be able to actually accomplish that, right? Again, it's in the process, not necessarily in the destination. The destination happens as a result of what's in that process. So you got to fill that gap. But if you're looking at the real numbers, right, your offers, your price points, your calls booked, your conversion rates, all that stuff, and you're looking at improving those numbers and consistently improving those numbers, and refining your products and services, refining your offers, refining your approach, continuing to train and develop and grow your team, then you're really getting yourself closer and closer and closer in a measurable way to that bigger goal. So I
Right.
think that's the way that I would look at numbered goals in business, as opposed to some generic number. And like you said, especially not, some type of empty goal like a Lamborghini or a Rolls Royce or whatever it might be. It's just, in my opinion, it's just naive.
Right.
It's just naive. And I think unless you're a real car guy, you really love cars and you really love, you've always wanted a Rolex on your wrist or something that speaks to you from childhood, and there's a real deeper reason why you want that thing. And, unless there's a real purpose, which for 99% of people there isn't, then sure, set those goals and really go for those goals and they'll drive you. But in most cases, I think it's either out of naivety or it's out of just insecurity,
Yeah.
to have goals and targets like that, because it's just not real. It makes a lot more sense if we're geared naturally towards survival, taking care of ourselves, taking care of our loved ones, our family, our tribe, our community. It makes more sense to want things like land, wanting to be more self-sufficient, wanting to have enough meat in the freezer for you and all your friends and all your family for the next year,
Right.
right? Wanting all these things, it makes more sense because it's more survival based. Wanting freedom, right? Getting rid of all the stress and anxiety and nervousness of, time commitments to a job or obligation, or, financial commitments or debt, wanting to get rid of those and having total freedom. That makes sense. I feel it's a lot more in tune with who we really are. And I think that's true fulfillment. But all these material goals, I don't know. Again, the more I've matured, they just don't speak to me at all. I'm just
They
not
don't.
impressed
Yeah.
by it.
I think there's a good quote. All the things that the Lamborghinis, the Gucci's, all that stuff, you're getting it to impress people who are not easily impressed by those things, because they can also have it. And most of the time, you're going to end up impressing people who don't have those things. So you're pulling people towards you who are essentially underneath you, not even close to the same level as you. And those people who are above you on the same level as you are not impressed by that. So, I see this too, like these guys who message me and they want to do business with me and stuff, like, they're trying to flex so hard. And I'm like, this is so try hard that I don't even want to message you back. Like, I just don't want to even talk to you. So, yeah, I think setting number goals, being logical about it, almost like a chat GPT computer, is better than these vague dreams. And it's good to dream. It's good to like have an understanding of where you're going in life. But I think in general, when it comes to business, it's better to just think logically than it is to think emotionally. That's how you should go about it, or at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you. And speaking of this type of philosophy and mindset, I want to pivot to Miyamoto Musashi, the Japanese warrior,
Mm.
and his philosophies on life and a couple of his books. I want to ask you about that. I want to talk about that a little bit because I've been recently revisiting all of that. And actually, just this morning, and I had no plans of talking about this, but it just makes sense right now with the topic that we're on. Just this morning, I was revisiting his 21 Rules for Life, and
Mm.
I found this source document. I realized the actual handwritten doctrine that he wrote, the 21 Rules for Life, he wrote it supposedly, a week before he actually died.
Mm.
Um, and he basically wanted to pass it down to his student who was going to take over his school and his teachings. And he also passed on to him the Book of Five Rings, which became probably his most famous book. But he also passed on this lesser known doctrine, the 21 Rules for Life. And the actual handwritten and signed paper in Japanese is actually available at a museum in Japan. And whenever I do go to Japan, probably in a couple of years, I plan on going. Just the way the trips are going to work out, it'll probably be in a couple of years that I'll be in Asia. I really want to go to that museum and actually see it in person as well. But I realized that this morning I was just looking more and more into it, and it was so interesting. I was looking at the history of it and zooming in on the actual picture of the handwritten note and just thinking, this is from the 1600s. I believe he died in 1645, right? So you're looking at someone's philosophy who was a very high level person. Do you know much about Miyamoto Musashi?
I know a little bit, but I haven't read his stuff.
So I would highly suggest it because everybody knows Sun Tzu, Art of War. I actually think Miyamoto Musashi's The Book of Five Rings is, or maybe A Book of Five Rings, but just look it up and you'll find it. I believe it's actually more practical. It's more relevant to business. It's more relevant to being a more balanced person in all aspects of your life. He has a common saying where he talks about the way. The way is essentially, to him, it's his way of life, being a samurai and that philosophy. But the way applies to everything. The way can be the way in business, the way in how you lead your life. And he says, once you know the way, you can see it in all things. And I love that mindset and I love that philosophy and just that take on it, right? Once you know the way in business, you can see it when you're training martial arts or vice versa. Once you know the way in life, you can see it in this other aspect, right? It's all relevant. It's just about seeing the way and that entire philosophy around it. But for anybody who doesn't know, who's listening to this, he had about, I believe it was 61 one-on-one duels. Those are real sword fights and they're to the death. So I believe from the age of 12 or 13 to the age of 27, he had 61 duels to the death. And he was still alive, so clearly he won all of them. He was undefeated. He's known as the greatest swordsman or the greatest samurai in that time period, at least. But also in Japanese history, he's very well renowned. There are multiple books about him and his life and accomplishments and whatnot. And he was essentially what they called, I think they called it a Ronin. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but he would travel from city to city. He would go far and wide to find challenges. And he would, challenge masters at their schools. He would go to duels at unknown locations, and he would play mind games. I remember there was a part of his book, Book of Five Rings, where he talks about how he would get to this duel. Maybe it was this one specific duel, if I remember correctly. He would get there early, figure out where the high ground is. And this is a very relevant military principle. They always say in modern military, find the high ground, they say take the high ground or the high ground will take you. Right? So you want the vision, you want the perspective, you want the high ground in military and warfare. So he, back in the day, back in the 1600s, he got to this duel and he essentially went up on a hill, I believe, and he hid. And he was just looking down. And he waited till his opponent came. Also, at that time, they could have came with multiple people and tried to jump him. I'm pretty sure that happened a few times where he had to fight an entire school of students to get his way out of there. But he basically would play these mind games. So he waited for his opponent to arrive. And I remember this story just vaguely because I listened to the book a while ago, to the audiobook. I'm just revisiting it now. But the opponent got there with a few other people and was getting really angry and frustrated that he's not there. But he was there from way before. He was, there actually a lot earlier. And he was just watching. And then he basically jumped down from the high ground and positioned himself and won that duel. And I'm pretty sure they said something like he won the duel in one clean shot. So, very interesting story, very interesting philosophies. And then he, right before his death, he wrote these 21 rules for life. And I would actually love to go through them with you and look at each one. What I'm going to do, I think this will be fun. I'll read each one and then we'll kind of deconstruct it, give our takes on it, and then we'll keep going.
Yeah,
we can be brief. Yeah, we can be in detail. We can do whatever we want, but I'll go through each one of the 21 rules. And I'll go through them in this way, okay? I'm not going to go through them in the regular translation. So,
Mm,
what I found today, this is what I was saying earlier. The real document, the actual handwritten note, is still here today. It's still preserved in a museum in Japan. There was a couple of students who went and wanted to get the most direct and explicit translation. So the modern translations you'll see if you look up 21 Rules for Life, Miyamoto Musashi, you'll see translations that the wording is a little bit different, the phrasing may be different. It's more modernized, so we
right.
understand it in our language today. But this translation took each word in each line. So each of in the actual handwritten 21 Rules for Life, the way Miyamoto Musashi wrote it is he put a number next to each one, and then he wrote each rule or each principle, you could call it, in 2 lines. So rule number 1 was 2 lines. Rule number
Mm,
2, 2 lines. That's just the way he wrote it,
right.
right? So what they did is they took each single word by itself. They defined the word Japanese to English. Then what they did is they looked at the synonyms for it. Then they looked at the context of that time period. What would he have meant by this word in that time period? And how is it commonly used? And then they referenced it against his other books, Book of Five Rings, and I think he has a couple other publishings that were published later. I believe a
Right.
family was holding it for a while. It's called the Book of Fire, Book of Earth. So they basically cross-referenced it with his other writings to see how he actually writes this stuff and what he means when he's saying this in other
Mm,
contexts to get to the exact explicit translation of what he actually meant to say.
right.
And those are the ones that I actually took notes on and I saved for myself. And I was, again, without any plans of talking about it here, I was reading them early this morning and just going through them and revisiting this for myself. So let's go through each of them. I'm going to read it to you and then I'll get your initial thoughts on it. Sounds good?
Let's go. Yeah.
Okay. So this is, again, 21 Rules for Life by Miyamoto Musashi, explicit translation, word for word. Rule number 1. I will not oppose the ways of the world. Thoughts?
I will not oppose the ways of the world. Being in a state of acceptance. Um, I love that. I think it's interesting that you mentioned the ways because I'm reading Confucius's Analects, and he talks about the way. And essentially, it's just an understanding of like yin and yang, and also being in alignment with the universe. And so, yeah, I love that. It's a rule on being in a state of acceptance, not resisting what is. Because when you're able to accept, you're able to actually move forward and progress and be malleable. Whereas most people are always resisting reality, which creates, that's what suffering is being in a state of resistance. Even Buddhism talks about this. Like, after doing a couple meditation retreats, like they talk about all root of suffering is either craving and clinging because you don't have it, and when you don't have it, you're actually suffering, or it's being in a state of aversion, pushing something away, which means that you're also in a state of suffering because you don't want it. You're not in one with reality. And so I think that being in a state of acceptance not only allows you to move forward and be malleable and be practical and actually progress, but also you're no longer suffering.
So I love that you said that because you beat me to it. I was actually going to say it's helpful to understand his context. Miyamoto Musashi was raised as a Buddhist. He was actually raised as a Buddhist, and a lot of his principles are around Buddhism, coupled with Japanese samurai culture in that time period where it was a time period of war, struggle, hardship, challenge. And I think near the end of his life, it was a time of more prosperity and comfort, but he was still very much in that same mindset and way of life that is the samurai way of life, that is, always being prepared for hardship and challenge. So it's helpful to understand the context, but you already got to it. It's rooted in Buddhism here. Okay. Rule number 2. I will not seek pleasurable activities.
Mm. It's funny that this is rule number 2 because you see this in all religions. is like push away from instant pleasure and gratification. And I was listening to a podcast. Again, I don't necessarily agree with this guy on a lot of things he says, and I think that he's probably not the best person on the planet. Or maybe, who knows, maybe that's the media trying to portray him that way. I don't know this guy, but I thought he made a really good point. He said if God isn't real, then religions wouldn't say that you shouldn't go towards pleasure. Like, that's our most innate feeling, is to go towards pleasure. It's to go towards what feels good. And so the fact that there is sayings out there that are telling you to get away from pleasure means that there's a reason, there's something bigger than us that's telling us not to do that, to go beyond our innate human animalistic desires. Now, point being is, I just found that really interesting, because when you're able to resist, it goes against point one, because you're resisting pleasure. But when you're able to resist pleasure and not go towards what just feels good in the moment, then you can view things from a higher perspective and not be like this animal who's just always chasing the next feeling good. And you can actually get more things done and create a bigger impact in your life, other people's life, in the world, by not going towards instant gratification. To me, this rule is push off instant gratification. And you'll see this with everybody who's successful. They'll say this, like, your ability to be successful is to resist instant gratification.
I agree with you. It comes down to discipline. It's an interesting take of what you said of whoever this gentleman is who said, that take on religion. The reason religions talk about, the reason there is a God is because all these religions push away from pleasure. Otherwise, they would just tell you, go enjoy life and drink and drugs and girls and everything else. But most religions are pretty clear on those rules and are, promoting more of a structured, family-oriented lifestyle. That being said, I don't know if that really explains it. I think that's just one way to look at it. I really don't know if that really explains the reasoning for those rules in these religions. But that being said, that's one thing we both love about religion. It's the structure, it's the discipline, it's the way of life. Now, you said one thing. You said this rule number 2 goes against rule number 1. I actually don't think it does. I think rule number 1, I will not oppose the ways of the world, is more in the sense that like the Stoic way of thinking. It's similar thinking, similar philosophy, because I will not oppose the ways of the world. Rule number 1 sounds to me like, whatever happens. I'm not going to focus on things that I can't control in the world, right? I'm going to focus on what I can control. That's what that sounds like. Rule number 2, I will not seek pleasurable activities, is more of a personal discipline, personal choice, that I'm not going to seek pleasurable activities. So I think they're slightly different. Now, another interesting point that I just want to point out again for context, if you go read the modern day translations of this, where it's translated for modern language for us to understand, they're all essentially telling you what to do. So instead of I will not seek pleasurable activities, rule number 2 may be something along the lines of do not seek pleasure, right? Whereas the real word for word translation, all 21 rules are I will or I will not. This is why I loved when I found this document. It was 13 pages and I read through the whole thing, detailed word for word. I went through all the Japanese translations and everything because I was so fascinated by it, that it's directly taking it as explicit as it possibly could be. I'll get your take on this and I'll continue on with the rules. I genuinely think if you're going to follow something, if you're going to follow a teaching, if you're going to follow a philosophy, this ties back into religion again. I genuinely believe, at least at first, you need to look at the explicit, direct translation and meaning. Because I find a lot of people who are part of a specific religion would take half the teachings that they like and leave out the other half they don't like, attach their own meanings to it. Somehow they know the mind of God. Somehow they say, oh no, that's not what God meant here. He meant this. That's not what Jesus was saying. Jesus actually meant this. We don't know what he meant or what God meant to say in the Torah or in the Quran or in the Bible. It's just not for us to interpret, right? I genuinely believe that at first you need to look at the explicit word for word direct translation And if you genuinely are a believer and want to follow that philosophy and that way of life, you need to follow that explicitly and word for word and directly. Now, as you go through the books over and over and over again, if you're a real scholar of religion and of your specific religion, you've read the book cover to cover, you've read the different texts about the prophet or about Jesus and all the associating texts with it, then sure, you can start to put things into context and you can start to see what they meant here, what they meant there. What could they possibly be implying? What was the context of that time period? That's interesting. But I think at first, you need to look at everything as explicitly and directly as possible. Maybe that's just my pragmatic way of thinking, but I genuinely believe that. Thoughts
No,
on that?
I agree, and I think it's interesting that he says "I," because he's not telling you to do something that he's, one, not doing himself, and two, which a lot of books do that, and two, he's saying, this is what works for me. This is essentially my rules of life. Go and check it out. Go and try it. If it's pragmatic for you, cool. If it's not, make your own rules and say, I do this. And yeah, I think that's interesting. That's a good point.
Yeah, so let's keep it moving. Rule number 3, I will give preference to nothing among all things. So he's essentially saying, I'm not valuing anything particularly, but I'm also valuing everything.
I got a different message from that.
What did you get from that?
I would rather say no than to say yes.
We reached, this is what I mean by interpretation, right? Even looking at the direct translation, we're reaching completely different meanings. And it's so interesting. It speaks to human psychology really more than anything. But I'll read the quote again and I'll let you explain. I will give preference. I think preference is a key word here. I think we really need to understand that word more deeply. Maybe in Japanese it'd be easier to understand. Direct translation, preference is a very specific word that could mean a lot of things. I will give preference to nothing among all things.
Yeah, I would rather go towards no than yes. And the reason why I say that is because he's saying there's a lot of things among all things, all worldly pleasures, all people, all environments. I would rather go towards nothing because it's essentially more pure. And from a practical perspective, the reason why this message to me is so powerful is because whenever there's the good quote, right? It's like, if you say yes to everything, you're saying no to yourself. Or if you say yes to everyone, you're saying no to yourself. And so that's what I get from this is I would rather, not in all cases, but I would prefer nothingness, stillness, pureness amongst everything around me.
You know what? I actually agree with you. You swayed me on this one. I think you're right. Knowing his Buddhist background too, I realized I suffered from a cognitive bias here. I used to say something all the time, and I think when I read this, I just immediately went naturally to this saying, and I just resonated with it, and I took it to mean what I used to say. And what I used to say is, everything is important, but nothing's important. Everything matters and nothing matters at the same time. And I still genuinely believe that. I believe nothing matters in the grand scheme of things. I genuinely believe to my core. Maybe this is what gives me a lot of confidence, gives me optimism. Maybe this is why I'm always so happy about life and so in tune with the present moment. I'm genuinely, thankfully, very thankful for this. I'm never depressed. I never have had any inclination towards the darker side. Maybe it's because of this philosophy that I genuinely, to my core, believe nothing matters. I mean, nothing. Think of whatever you think matters. It doesn't matter. Because on the grand scheme of things, on the grand scale of the universe, it is so mind-boggling. We're talking about billions of galaxies filled with billions of stars, with billions of planets. Quite literally, we are nothing. It's our entire planet, our galaxy, or it doesn't matter. It's just, and we don't know anything yet. For all we know, I don't even want to get into this topic, but I genuinely believe at my core, nothing matters. But at the same time, you may be asking, how is that possible? But it is. This is just who I am. I don't know how to explain it. This is just my reality. And I genuinely believe this. I genuinely believe everything matters. I believe how you show up matters. I believe how you talk matters. I believe how you think matters. I believe what time you wake up matters. I believe what you eat matters. I believe who your partner is matters. I believe everything matters. Every little inch, every little bit. I believe in taking every single advantage that I can in life. I believe in being my best self. I believe in pursuing my potential, expanding on all fronts. I believe in maximizing this life that we have. So
Right.
I hold this duality at all times. So when I read this, I will give preference to nothing among all things. I guess the nothing and all kind of confused me, and I thought about my own philosophy. But you're right.
Yeah, I agree with you on this too. I think like it goes back to the philosophy. I mean, we can go deep on this topic, and I don't know if I want to, but like it's your definition of what mattering actually is. But you're right. It's like in the grand scheme of things, your life is a blip. But at the same time, all of these things matter to you. It's what's important to you in this one life that you have. So even though in the
Mhm.
grand scheme of things it doesn't quote unquote matter, it does matter for your life, to you in this moment. And I talk about this too. It's like people always try to find their big purpose. It's like just find what matters to you. That's You don't have to find this big huge purpose that like changes the world. What does matter to you at this point? Maybe it's just making the best burgers, in your neighborhood, like, and that
Mhm.
matters. That's pretty cool. So
Mhm.
yeah, I agree with that point, but I didn't see it that way when I read it.
No, I think your take on it was the actual way it was meant to be taken by Miyamoto Musashi.
Mm.
So I think you're on point there. Let's go on to number 4. I consider myself unimportant, but the world so great and deep.
I consider myself unimportant, but the world is so great and deep.
It doesn't say is. Again, this translation is very different than the regular ones you will find. This is the exact word for word translation. I consider myself unimportant, but the world so great and deep.
Mm. This this I think now is your point from the previous one.
Hmm, maybe.
I consider myself so unimportant. I'm a blip on the map, but the world, everything around me is like a wonder. It's crazy. It's like a miracle that everything around me even exists.
My
Um,
point was slightly different because, on the
Slightly different.
factor
Yeah.
of nothing matters, I meant, even our world doesn't matter, nothing really matters. I mean, it's it's I don't know how to explain it without just sounding almost nihilistic, I guess you would say.
No,
Um
I get it. I get it. I'm saying it's more along the same lines, but it's not the same point. But the way I'm reading this is, yeah, I'm myself unimportant. I'm myself a blip in the universe, but the universe is great. Like that thing is something to be discovered. I
mhm.
don't know if it's
And
a
I love
rule
that.
for life though. Maybe I'm not reading into it enough.
Okay, let's look at it as a rule for life. How could this be a rule for life? I consider myself unimportant, but the world so great and deep. I think it is a good rule for life, actually, because most people are so concentrated on their own lives. And this is why every simple problem, every little thing, every hiccup is overly exaggerated. This is why people are stressed, people are
Mm,
anxious, because they consider themselves so important. When you realize you're really not that important, but the world is deep, the world is great, the world is magnificent, miraculous, then it changes things, right? It really changes your
yeah,
perspective. So I think it is an important rule for life, basically not to take yourself so seriously.
I love that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, we're coming to some conclusions here. All right, this is just think about this, man. 350 years or so later, a couple of young guys are sitting down discussing his rules for life. That's impact, right? I love this.
Yeah.
Just when I think about things like this, I'm always so fascinated and so inspired, or like really deeply inspired. Rule number 5, it seems like it's a pretty straightforward one, but I'll get your take on it. I will be free of desire throughout my entire life.
Mm. This just goes back to his Buddhist principle. Like if he's chasing, clinging, craving, he's suffering. So he doesn't have to suffer if he's not craving and clinging to something all the time. That little space, and like you experience this. I think a lot of people experience this. Anytime you crave, even if it's something small, you actually are in a state of stress, are in a state of suffering. Like if you're sitting down and you're going, oh, I really wish I had some X, whatever X is. That little moment of like, oh, I really wish, you're saying essentially there's something missing from you feeling whole, feeling fulfilled. And that is suffering in itself. So this is the message I get from it. It's like you can remove suffering if you don't crave and cling on to something.
I agree. And this just reminded me of Naval Ravikant's saying around not having desires. And he essentially says, having desires is just waiting to be, disappointed.
Mm.
Whereas a true life of freedom is a life where you don't have any wants, you don't have any stress, you don't have any desires. So it's interesting. It's an interesting way to really look at these things. Let's move on to rule number 6. Actually, I was going to say one last point on number 5. I will be free of desire throughout my entire life. The part that stood out to me is throughout my entire life. It's easy to be free of desire for a day, for a week, to be disciplined and try to, be on track for a short period of time. But what stood out to me is he said clearly, this is word for word translation, throughout my entire life. By the way, it's also interesting to note, again, he wrote this knowing he's going to die. I got to go back and get clear on the details here, but I think he was going to his final duel, his final battle. But he prepared all this. He prepared this scroll where he wrote all these 21 rules by hand. He prepared the Book of Five Rings. He got all his friends and students to come to his home. He gave the one student the scrolls and the teachings and the writings. He gave them his belongings and he left. So this was like a departing into death. So he consciously went into death and he prepared these. So interesting to look at it through that context.
It's even more powerful because he's essentially saying, I will be free of the desire to even be alive. Like I won't even cling on to life, which is like, that's the ultimate desire for humans. It's like, I want to live forever. But even him, he's like, I'm not even going to suffer that much. I'm not even going to crave on to life. I'm not even going to crave on to this body. It's even more powerful when you think of it from that perspective, because it's not just a principle. But yeah, I love the fact that you said throughout my entire life. He didn't say I'm gonna be free of desire 6 days a week, or
Yeah.
for a month and then take a week
there's
off.
no compromise.
It's a commitment. It's a lifelong commitment. It's a consistency.
It's funny. Me and you were talking about this off air. We were talking
Yeah.
about a couple of different things, and we said off air that we got to have rules in life, and we both said it's either all or nothing. And we were talking about how I can't do something 6 days a week or 5 days a week. I can never ever subscribe to the philosophy of I do this on weekdays and I do this on weekends. I believe in being who you truly are and being your best every day and striving for that. You're never going to be perfect. You're never going to just nail it all on the head, but it's the consistent pursuit of that ideal.
Yeah.
And we talked about this off air, and now it comes up again.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
Rule number 6: I will not regret my deeds.
I love that. He's not looking in the past. This is all Buddhist principles, like everything he's saying. He's not looking in the past. I will not regret all my deeds. Not just bad deeds, good deeds. Everything is seen from an equanimous place. Everything is neutral. I did this thing, move on. I don't have to sit on it and think about it and I shouldn't have done that. It's nope, I did it, next. And it's truly living in the present moment. That's what I'm getting from this.
Yeah, and I remember reading the description and the follow-up notes added to this rule from the Japanese translation, and it essentially said something along the lines of when you look at his other works and writings, he is essentially taking all the good, all the bad, all the 61 people that we know of that he's killed in duels. Right? This is a man also, just think about that. You've killed by hand with a sword 61 other men. I mean, to have that burden on you, I'm sure it's not easy, right? Even back in the day where life was not as valued, and war and especially samurai culture, honor, and all these things were a completely different way than we look at it today, 300, 400 years later. But it's just interesting that he's saying, I will not regret my deeds, right? Deeds, the things he's done, the actions, he will not regret those. And that's powerful because there's a lot of unfortunate deeds in there in his life. So that part is very interesting. Let's move on to rule number 7. This one's really good for today's society, for sure. What we were talking about earlier with empty goals, this one's very relevant today. Rule number 7. I will not be envious of anybody, good or bad.
Not be envious.
What do you think he means by bad? Why would you be envious of someone's bad aspects of life?
The way I'm reading this, I would not be envious of someone. What do you say? I will not be envious
I
of
will not be envious of anybody,
any
good or bad.
anybody, good or bad, because bad people can do great things too.
Hmm.
Bad people can
So
achieve.
you think he's referring to the individual when he's saying good or bad, the person's character?
I think that's one thing from a macro perspective is regardless of who they are, I will not be envious of them. That's what he's essentially saying. Doesn't matter who they are, I will not be envious of them. They could be good, they could be bad, does not matter. Because of course anybody can achieve great things, good or bad. But I will not be envious of anyone, good or bad. Good or bad. You can take a look at it from a micro perspective as well. I'm curious to see what you think about this.
I'm thinking about it because I really don't have my thoughts gathered yet. It's an interesting one, right? Because I think the way you phrased it is probably the best understanding of it, which is regardless of who it is, a good person, a bad person, a high level person, a low level person. Obviously, the main takeaway here is I will not be envious of anybody. Right? The good or bad part again makes it a little more complicated and more interesting. But I think the real takeaway is I will not be envious of anybody. It's interesting because I'm thinking from his context, from his point of view, who would he be envious of? I know of one story where there was one person who supposedly beat him in a duel. And again, this may be the last duel that he went to. I have to go back and revisit the story. But there was one person who was an instructor of a different school, different teaching. He also had a very rough upbringing and rough life. I believe he adopted an 11-year-old kid when he was in his, I believe, 30s or so. So he's had a lot of interesting aspects of his life. So I'm trying to think, who would he be thinking about when he's saying, I will not be envious of anybody?
Well, I thought about it from the micro perspective too. My micro perspective is when he says good or bad, is like he's either talking about good envy or bad envy. Like sometimes envy is a good thing because it pushes you to a new level, right? Or it could be bad envy where it like drives you mad. And he's saying good envy or bad envy. Or from a micro perspective, he could also be talking about being envious of someone who is not as good as him in terms of skills, and that's an easier life. It's a life without as much burden. It's like, oh well, he sucks like that. I bet that would. And I've thought about that. We talked about this in the last podcast as well, I think, where I was like, you know what,
The drunk guy.
that drunk guy, like his life is so simple, and it's easy to become envious of someone who's just happy with the least amount of things. No accomplishments, nothing, just a simple life. So from a macro perspective, I'm viewing it as I'm not envious of anybody, regardless of who they are as a person. From a micro perspective, you can view it as good envy or bad envy. Both of them are bad, even if it's making you a better person or making you worse as a person, or someone who is bad at what they do and not being envious of their simpler, easier life.
Yeah, I think that's a good deconstruction of it. And I guess at the end of the day, you could look at it as envy is generally speaking, being jealous of someone or something. You're envying them. You want that thing. But I think this goes back to his Buddhist roots as well. Maybe he's saying, I'm not even going to be inspired by anybody else or anybody else's accomplishments. I'm essentially not going to think anything of anyone else or anyone else's accomplishments.
Yeah.
I kind of take it to be basically that from a Buddhist point of view, because, nothing is forever and everything is, what's the word for it? Impermeable. I'm not sure if that's the right word in Buddhist context.
Yeah, impermanent.
So I take it as he's essentially saying, I just will not think anything of, anybody or anybody's accomplishments, good or bad.
Yeah.
I think we broke that down in good depth. Let's go on to number 8. Rule number 8. I will not be sad when I must take my leave of any way. Now, let me give you context here. anyway, the last two words, there's a specific Japanese word, and it correlates to when he says the way, meaning the philosophy of the samurai life. So
Capital
he's
W.
talking about, yeah, he's talking about the actual way that he says, once you know the way, once you see the way, you can see it in all things. That's what he means by any way. So I will not be sad when I must take my leave of any way.
When his time comes, and that's how things are. That's the way of life. That's nature. What's the quote? Nature has the last laugh. That's how I view this quote. Nature has the last laugh, so can't be sad about it.
Yeah, I look at this as, first of all, very fitting because he's writing this knowing he's leaving this life,
Yeah.
right? He's quite literally passing away in 1 week from this point. So I think he's writing this with that in mind, saying, I will not be sad when I have to take my leave and leave this life, this lifestyle, this way of life. But I think the other aspect of it is him saying, I will not be sad. So I think it's, again, back to almost Stoic philosophy where you're not adding emotions to something. You're not feeling good or bad about it. You're not feeling either way. It's neutral. It's almost like he's looking at all things as they're neutral. They're balanced. It's the yin and yang. It's the way of life. It is what it is, in today's terms. Rule number 9, I will not seek excuses and will hold no grudge against myself or others.
I will not seek excuses and hold no grudge against myself or others.
I will not seek excuses and will hold no grudge against myself or others.
I love that. Accepting responsibility for everything that is and being able to let go, not shaming or guilting, which again is a state of suffering.
Do you think he almost meant, I will not make excuses. I will not seek excuses. So he won't look for any excuses. He's not trying to find excuses. But the second part is interesting because you normally wouldn't put holding a grudge in the same sentence as making excuses for, being disciplined or living a certain way of life. So you think maybe he's saying, I will not seek excuses. I'm not looking for excuses. I'm not looking for reasons not to live this way of life. But if I do mess up, or if I do, have an off day, or if I do, not be as disciplined one day, I will hold no grudge against myself or others. I'm not going to dwell on it. I'm not going to sit in it. I'm going to move on. Do you think that's what he means?
Yeah, I think he's saying I will take full responsibility. I'm not going to make excuses, but also the fact that I messed up, I'm not going to like beat myself up for it. Essentially moving on. Every message that I'm seeing from this guy is like, be in a state of acceptance. It is as it is. Keep moving forward. Life keeps moving forward. But yeah, I agree with that. That's what I think he's trying to say.
Yeah, that's what I take away from this 2-part almost quote, because it's almost like a dichotomy.
Yeah.
I'm not looking for excuses, but if I do find excuses, it's human nature at the end of the day, and I do slip up, I'm not going to blame myself or look for others to blame. I'm not going to point fingers either. I like that he put others in there as well. That goes to show you he's really been thinking about this, right? Because normally you would say, I'm not seeking excuses. And if I do slip up, I won't blame myself. I'm going to just move on. But he said, I won't blame myself or others. I think that's important to look at in today's context, in entrepreneurship, in business. I think, we look around and I see a lot of people, including myself, in the past, we point fingers. We like to look for excuses in why others caused our way of life or our troubles or problems. And some people live with that for life. Some people hold grudges against family, against business partners, and they live with that hatred and that grudge for life, and they just blame them, as opposed to saying it is what it is, and I will not seek excuses, and I will move on, and I will create my own destiny, my own future, and I will live this life, like Miyamoto Musashi is saying. I think that's really powerful in today's context as well.
Yeah, I think that most people have rationalizations, and that's their way of not holding a grudge on themselves, because otherwise, if they don't rationalize, then they beat themselves up. And
Yeah,
like,
I agree.
if you don't rationalize, then what's the choice that's left? If you don't make excuses for it, what's the choice that's left? Well, fuck, it's my fault. I should beat myself up for it. It's like saying, no, don't make excuse, don't rationalize, but also don't beat yourself up at the same time. They're both not options, essentially.
It's really the best way to go about it. It's the most practical way to go about it.
Right.
So I think it's a very reasonable way to look at this. This next one is interesting because with the direct translation, I mean, it actually does make a lot of sense. But with the direct translation, you might say, I don't agree with this one. This is the only rule where once I was going through all this and I was making notes of all these rules in the direct translation, I actually thought, depending on who you are, you could make a case that you don't agree with this rule. Every other rule, the other 20 rules, I believe you can't in good conscience make a case against them.
Right.
A good high-level person who wants the best life for themselves and those around them has to abide by the other 20 rules, realistically speaking, if you want the best life, the ideal scenario. But this one rule, you could make an argument against. But he's a samurai, so for his life, it makes sense. He said, rule number 10, I will not indulge in the way of passionate love.
I think as a warrior, it makes sense.
Exactly.
You see this with a lot of like old school boxers, even like Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson. What did they do before a fight? They wouldn't have any passion or love in their life. They would completely isolate themselves because they had to focus on the task at hand. And I think when you're mission oriented, when you got a big mission, sometimes you do have to sacrifice certain things. And I think that's what he's trying to say. He's like, hey, I got a big mission. I got no time for passion and love in my life right now. Like, I'm just going ahead.
Or ever. Not just right now.
Or ever. In his case. And also keep in mind, like with Buddhism, a huge part of it, the 5 precepts is no sexual misconduct, which means Buddhists are completely celibate. Which
really, all Buddhists are celibate?
If you're like really practicing Buddhism at a high level, it's complete celibacy.
Is that a fact?
Yeah. 5 precepts of Buddhism is no killing of any kind, no stealing, no lying, no sexual misconduct, and no influences from external sources such as drugs or alcohol. So those are the 5 precepts.
Listen, I trust you, but I'm going to have to verify this for myself. After this, I'm going to have to look that up, because if that's the real practice of Buddhism, not for the monks, but for an average person who wants to be a Buddhist, if it's full celibacy, that's actually I did not know that at all.
I'm talking full Buddhism, right? Like you can talk about Islam too, right? Like Islam talks about the woman has to be covered completely from head to toe. Do you see all women doing that? No. Some people say they're Muslim and they just cover a little bit, right? I'm sure there's there's Buddhists out there who practice passion, love, and sex. But when it comes,
I know there is, because I know of people who claim they're Buddhists and they have kids and wives and everything else.
Exactly. So some people don't follow things to a T. Like we know people who look at certain religious texts and they go, yeah, but in context, da 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 da. But the real people who will follow everything to a T, one of the 5 precepts is no sexual misconduct whatsoever, which means complete celibacy. And you'll see this with monks who really give up their life for Buddhism. They're completely celibate.
So that explains it then. His Buddhist upbringing, combined with being a warrior and a samurai for life, being a traveling samurai who's going from place to place, province to province, finding warriors to challenge and doing duels and all that. He committed his entire life to his way, to the way. So that makes a lot of sense. What I love about this, of course, you and I are both in long-term relationships, and obviously we're not practicing celibacy of any kind. But what I love about this is the commitment to your purpose, the commitment that, again, it's all or nothing. I just love that his mindset always is all or nothing. And it's a trade-off. It's a sacrifice. Sacrifice might not even be the right word for it, because it seems like you're killing off something good. And in this case, passionate love, you could argue again, is something good. But I think trade-off is a better word. To accomplish and achieve great things, you have to trade off great things. Right? And I think that's the interesting part. And that's something that I've struggled with myself. When I'm looking at, for example, time management. I want to go train MMA for multiple hours every night. I want to do this and that. I want to play sports. I want to do all this. But at the same time, business is my number one priority. But at the same time, I have, family and relationship obligations. All these things are all important to me, right? But the word priority, by definition, eliminates everything else. It keeps the priority. Everything else is not priority. You can't have 10 priorities.
Right.
That's not priority anymore, right? So I love that here there's clear trade-offs. And again, he's accepted the trade-off. This is something I'm actually working on myself because I'm consciously looking at eliminating certain areas of my life, certain things that take up a lot of my time, throws me off my sleep schedule, things of that nature. Because if the reality is my top priority is business and my relationships with my partner and my family and my closest circle, then I have to trade off other things that take up a lot of my time.
Right.
Leisure activities, training, martial arts, things of that nature. So it's something that is very, very hard for me because I always want to do it all, but it's something that I'm working on. And I love seeing examples of people who are making that trade off.
I agree. Sacrifice.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep it moving. Number 11, I will not seek elegance and beauty in all things. I will not seek elegance and beauty in all things.
It again, Buddhist principle, which is to view things for what they are. I remember when I went to the retreat, one of the sermons was that, people will look at a woman and they'll say, wow, she's beautiful. Her hair is beautiful. But if that same piece of hair or a strand of hair was in your soup, you wouldn't find it beautiful. And so it's oftentimes people are looking at their desires and they make it bigger than it actually is. And so to me, what he's trying to say here is keep things all equanimous, no labels. Everything is the way it is.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair description of it. So no comments for me. Rule number 12, I will have no luxury in my house. This is directly translated. So in the indirect translations you'll find online, it'll usually say, don't seek luxury for the sake of luxury itself, something along those lines. But the exact actual translation, and there will be a couple follow-up quotes that are in line with that, he's saying in his house, in his own possession. I will have no luxury in my house.
I think this is a Japanese principle as well, which they like minimalism is a huge part of that culture. But also with the Buddhist side of his, it's like he wants to keep things clean, minimalist, which probably keeps his head organized as well, right? If you have too much around your house. Like yesterday, I had all of these things on this desk and I'm like, this is messing with my head. I have to get rid of like most of these things. And I spent some time, 5 minutes, and I got rid of everything and now my desk is clear and it feels good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think with Japanese culture in general, humility is a big part of that. And humility and not having luxury is it goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
Okay. Rule number 13, similar, but this is more on a personal note. I will have no delicacies for myself. I will have no delicacies for myself. In modern language, you're not eating ice cream. You're not having desserts.
Yeah. And I think this goes to he talks about no luxuries in the house. He's putting no luxuries in him as well.
Mm-hmm. The one place you truly do have to live in all the time, your body.
Yeah.
Interesting. And what I also like about this quote, direct translation, it says, for myself, meaning it implies he provides delicacies for others if he's hosting or whatever it might be. But he says, I will have no delicacies for myself. So he's not judging others. Others can do whatever they want. They can have delicacies in his presence as well. He's not tempted, is what I'm taking away from that.
Yeah.
Because this is direct translation, every word means something. I feel like we have to look at every word in the way he phrased it because clearly it's particular phrasing. All right. Rule number 14. I will not own anything that will one day be a valuable antique. That's the exact translation.
Use things for their purpose, not for their potential value. And use, I'm in the kind of watch world. I love watches, and I think this is like people talk about this as well, like who have watches. I was talking to my buddy Jason, and he's like, it's almost like a disease. Like you're just like next watch, next collectible. So it's the same thing. You're craving clinging, and it creates this unnecessary burden on your life. And so, like even with a lot of, Muslims do this again, but those who are really strict towards it, like they're not allowed to wear jewelry for this reason. So yeah, that's what I get from it.
I think you nailed it with the practicality. I think that's exactly what it is. Use things for the practical purpose of them in present time, and don't just look for, owning or possessing things that are one day going to be valuable.
Right.
So interesting to look at. All right. Rule number 15. I will have trust in myself and never be superstitious.
I think what he means by superstitious here is planning for the worst. And I think entrepreneurs do this all the time, right? They're always in their head going, what if, what if, what if? And they're future pacing the worst case scenario before it even happens, or if it even happens at all, which is a lack of trust in yourself, because if you truly trusted yourself, you wouldn't future pace the worst case scenario. But also, you're creating suffering in your head of something that hasn't happened or may never happen. It may never happen. I had one of my clients ask this, and they're like, well, what if, the prospect says that? I'm like, well, if the prospect says that, deal with it then. Like, they haven't said that. And it was kind of like it wasn't even an objection handle. He was just like, what if this happens? Like, this scenario, like, deal with it if it happens. If it doesn't happen, don't talk about it.
Yeah, I think you're right about what he's referring to when he's talking about being superstitious. It ties in again with Stoic philosophy. Stoics, there's a quote, I don't know if it's Seneca or Epictetus, one of these guys, who said, he who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary.
That's it right there. That's it.
Yeah. This is why the Stoics had the practice of fear setting. If you're really suffering about future anxiety, sit down and write out, actually physically write out your worst case scenarios, worst possible fears. If you want to couple that with the actual practice of it, go dress up as a homeless guy, go sit on the corner and actually put your hand out and feel what it would feel like if you lost it all. And once you do this fear setting practice, whether writing it or actually acting it out for one day, or fast for 24 hours, 72 hours, fast for 5 days, and feel what it feels like not to have any food. And then you realize, wow, the worst case scenario is really not as bad as I made it out to be in my mind. And no matter how bad it gets, I could always get back to where I am today.
Yeah.
I think it's a powerful place to come to.
It's a lot worse in your head than it is in reality.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a good rule for sure. And it's definitely very relevant today. Number 16 is very, very practical. Very practical. But I think for entrepreneurs, it's interesting if you look at it from a certain perspective. He says, weapons, so swords in his case. He was known for having a long sword and a short sword. So he developed this, just for context, for anybody who doesn't know, he developed this technique, this style of having two swords. Most people would fight with one sword and hold it with both hands, right? That was the common technique. But he developed a style of having two swords in each hand, like one sword in one hand, one sword in the other hand. One sword was short, one sword was long. And he would essentially have his own approach to the art of being a samurai and sword fighting and these duels, and this is why he was so successful. So when he's saying weapons, he's talking about his swords. Number 16, he says, weapons are of the highest importance to me. I will not concern myself with other things.
His craft is of the most important thing to him. Getting to a level of mastery is the most important thing in his life. That's what I get from it. Mastery is the utmost purpose.
I think that's the mastery piece is the part. Yeah. It's not necessarily the craft, but it's the mastery of it. I think it's the tools of the trade.
Yeah.
Whether it's your body, whether it's your mind. That's why he used to say, in other works that he wrote, I think it's in the Book of Five Rings too. He used to say, as a samurai, as a warrior, you have to be balanced. So you take up things like painting. You take up other arts because it helps you be more balanced in war. So I think when he's talking about tools of the trade and weapons, he's talking about, this is all I'm focused on, is mastery of my trade.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. Number 17, again, all or nothing mindset. I will always be prepared to die on this way. Again, way is the way of life, this philosophy. I will always be prepared to die on this way.
Integrity and truth of his philosophy over anything else. That's what I get from this, is like, I'm willing to die for my truth. I'm willing to die for my philosophy and the way that I live life. Which shows how strong his integrity is.
I love that. I love that you took integrity from that. That's really good. I love that. This is so good because we're taking ancient wisdom and summing it up in a modern word that we all understand,
Right.
and it gives us so much more context. I like it. Number 18. I will take advantage of no treasure or manner in my old age.
I will take advantage of no treasure.
I think this ties in with what he said. I will not own antiques or anything that's going to eventually be an antique. I think it goes back to owning possessions or setting up for old age or a later point in life.
Yeah, and I think he's also referring to the fact that like that shit doesn't matter when you're older. Like,
What we were saying about goal setting.
yeah, like, well, what does it matter if you have treasures when you're old? Like, you're old, you're close to the end. Who cares? We talked about the pharaohs, right? So that's what I think he's referring to, is like those things don't essentially matter, especially when you're older.
And I think the key word here is advantage. He's saying, I will take advantage of no treasure, meaning I won't use it. Meaning there's no advantage in it for me. I will take advantage of no treasure.
It's of no use
in my old age.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting takeaway. For people that are just chasing money, in your old age, it's of no use. Besides, having enough to, again, live a good life and take care of yourself and your loved ones and, be healthy. But besides that, after a certain metric, after a certain number, it's really of no use. Number 19. This is directly now talking to his beliefs. Number 19. Buddhas and gods are worthy of adoration. Adoration, is that how you say it? To adore someone? Adoration?
Yeah.
But I will ask them for nothing.
I
love that.
They're worthy.
I love
they're
that.
worthy to learn from, but you got to go out there and learn your own lessons. You got to go out there and practice and go through your own life. Don't make the Buddha your, they say be your own Buddha. That's essentially what he's saying, in my opinion.
I love that he's saying not even they're worthy to learn from, but gods and Buddhas are worthy of adoring and admiring and praising.
Right.
Praise a God. Believe in a God. Almighty has a plan for you. All of that. But don't ask them for anything. Know that they're there and trust that they're there. And like he said earlier in his other rule, trust yourself. Don't have superstitions. Go out there and do the work. Earn it, is what I'm getting from that.
They're also a bigger planner than you. When you ask them for something, you're asking for your plans, not theirs. I love that. Yeah.
There's another quote, something similar to this that I don't know right now, so I'm just going to briefly touch on it, and people can look this up. It's about Hercules. And there's a saying, there's even, I remember seeing this in a story where there's graphics and pictures with it, where Hercules, I believe, is sent down to Earth, if I remember correctly. And there's this like chariot that's stuck in the mud, and he's asking the gods for help. And the gods say something along the lines of, this is your burden to shoulder. So essentially, we're not going to help you. This is for you to dig out of. Something along those lines. I think this is similar to that. I will ask them for nothing. I love that.
It's also in alignment to, I remember this scholar talking about this. He's like, people always ask, if God exists, then why is he doing all of these terrible things on the planet? Why is he allowing all these terrible things to happen on the planet, right? And he says, well, if God was here, he would also ask you the same thing. He would ask you, why are you allowing these terrible things to happen? And so it just shows like you're the one who's in control.
Interesting. Rule number 20. We're almost there. Almost to the end of it. Rule number 20. Even if I sacrifice my life, I will never sacrifice my name.
Wow. Integrity again. I will never sacrifice what I believe in. I would rather, essentially, I would rather die. Die.
Not essentially. Directly saying, I will rather sacrifice my life than sacrifice my name. And I think, again, in context, Japanese culture, samurai culture, the family names are also the names of the schools, the names of the specific approach to martial arts and his sword fighting technique that he had. So I think it's like sacrificing your name or dropping your integrity and being willing to lose your reputation is far worse than losing your life.
Yeah. It's also interesting that he's like he talks about non-attachment, and I'm seeing this from I don't know if it's a bigger perspective, but I'm seeing his flaws during this because he talks about non-attachment a lot, but there's still things that he's attached to. He's still attached to making sure he has a good reputation with his name and going towards his truth. So it's just interesting to note that.
That's true. I think that's where the difference and the distinction between Japanese samurai culture and Buddhist culture
Right.
is. Like Buddhism and the beliefs around just again, nothing is permanent and don't be attached to anything, and attachment is the ultimate suffering and all of that, versus going to war and one man walks out alive and being great at your craft, mastering your craft, starting a school, a whole new philosophy of martial arts, and having students follow you and disciples, which he had. I think those are a bit separate.
Yeah.
But he's essentially a mix of both. And then rule number 21, the final rule. It's very simple. You could probably guess it. Do you want to take a guess at what rule number 21 is?
I have no clue. I got no clue.
It's so simple, and he's talked about it multiple times already, and it has to do with the way. There's a word for it.
Follow the way. Follow the way of life.
I will never deviate from the way of. There's a Japanese word. It's written like hi-ho, but I'm not sure. Again, I'm probably butchering that. But that's the way in terms of the way he refers to it with his martial arts philosophy. But he says 21. This is the last rule he wrote before he handed that scroll to his disciples and walked into his death willingly and knowingly. He said, I will never deviate from the way.
Follow the rules. Here are the 20 rules. Rule 21. Go back and read them.
Yeah. Rule number 21, don't break the rules. There's no compromise. That's basically what it is. You're right. Rule number 21, there is no compromise. Don't look for shortcuts. Go back and follow the 20 rules I just wrote down.
Right.
You will never deviate. There is no deviation. This is what I was referring to with religions and people, like you said, picking and choosing what they like to follow, interpreting it however they like to interpret it, right? You can't be a half Muslim or a half Christian or a half Jew or a half Buddhist. You either are or you aren't.
Right.
That's just the truth of the world. I mean, that's my belief. You can like it or hate it. So I believe if you follow it all the way, or don't follow it at all, right? And I think that's what he's saying. I will never deviate. There is no deviation. There is no, this is my way of practicing this philosophy. There are set rules. If you want to follow this rule guide, this rule book, this philosophy, you got to follow the exact rules. So rule number 21, go back and read the last 20 rules.
Yeah, I love that.
It's such a good way to end it. And I put a little note here that might be of value. Let me just see what I wrote under 21, where he said, I will never deviate from the way of this Japanese word. This word means, as has often been mentioned, all forms of martial arts that a samurai should learn and develop throughout his whole life as his inborn duty. That's what the word means. So basically, rule number 21, he's saying, I will never deviate from the way of all forms of martial arts that a samurai should learn and develop throughout his whole life as an inborn duty.
Right. I love that.
That's the context around that. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Miyamoto Musashi's 21 rules for life. This was not planned at all, by the way. We talked for over an hour before we got recording. We're an hour and a half into this recording. Decided to do this as a fun exercise to go through these 21 rules and get your take on it. I think it was very fruitful. I definitely learned a lot.
I learned a lot.
Just hearing your take on things and how we look at it, differently, even though we have very similar takes on it, just hearing your perspective, a couple modern words applied to it, I think was really interesting. And I hope everybody else found it as interesting as we did. And I think this is a beautiful place to wrap it up. I know we both got to go and I don't want to take any more of your time either. I asked you this question last time you were on the podcast. This is how we always end the podcast, but I'll give you a variation of the question today, okay? Today we will deviate, okay? I'll give you a variation. So the question usually is, knowing everything you know today, if you could go back to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give yourself? And I don't know if you remember the first answer you gave the first time you were on the podcast, because I don't. But
I don't.
That being said, I'll open it up to you to either answer the question again, depending on where you are at this stage, and you might have a different answer than the first time. It'd be interesting to go back and compare. Or because of this topic of the 21 rules for life from Miyamoto Musashi, I'll ask you this question. If you could create your own rule for life, one rule for life, what would that be?
Understand that everything is planned for you, and if it isn't, it's better to view life that way.
Well said. I couldn't have come up with something as beautiful as that in such a short time on the spot. So we'll take that answer. And I love that. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. As always, it's a pleasure. We're going to have you on time and time again. And we'll continue this journey of entrepreneurship and life together as friends first, and then peers in the business world second. Thank you for your time, and let everybody know where they can find you. And then we'll wrap up on that note.
Just watch this podcast again. That's what you can do for me. Don't find me. Just go and watch this podcast a second time.
I love that. That's an interesting way to put it. And I think I know what you mean by that. So I love that.
Yeah, it's more impactful that way.
I love it. Mo, thank you again for your time, man. Always a pleasure. And we'll see you on the next one.
Of course, man. Thank you for having me on.